The evening my son Thaddeus told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas dinner, I was standing in my greenhouse, repotting orchids. My hands were deep in soil, phone wedged between my ear and shoulder, when I heard the words that would shatter 58 years of holiday traditions. "Mom, Brielle thinks it would be better if you didn't join us this year." Just like that, casual as commenting on the weather. I nearly dropped my favorite Phalaenopsis, the one with delicate pink speckles I'd nurtured for a decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I am Margot Whitley, 67 years young as of last spring, retired museum curator with a passion for rare plants and a weakness for my only son. When my husband Curtis passed away 5 years ago, he left behind not just memories of 38 years together, but also an estate worth more than anyone in our small mountain town of Everthorne could have imagined. Curtis had made some shrewd investments in tech startups back when everyone thought he was crazy. Turns out, he was just ahead of his time. The Whitley estate sits on the outskirts of Everthorne, nestled against the Sapphire Mountains. From my bedroom window, I can see the mist clinging to pine trees each morning, the changing colors of seasons painting a new masterpiece every few months. Curtis and I built this place 30 years ago, back when Thaddeus was just a boy with scraped knees and boundless energy. We chose every brick, every beam, carefully creating not just a house, but a legacy. After Curtis died, the house felt impossibly large. 15 rooms for one woman seemed absurd, like wearing a ball gown to buy groceries. But I couldn't bear to sell it. This was Thaddeus's childhood home, the place where someday his children would build memories too. When Thaddeus met Brielle 4 years ago, I was thrilled. My son, at 33, had finally found someone who made his eyes light up. She was striking, tall with auburn hair that seemed to catch fire in the sunlight, always impeccably dressed, in clothes I later learned cost more than my monthly utility bills. She worked in brand management, whatever that meant, and spoke with the polished confidence of someone who had never been told no. Their wedding was a lavish affair at Sapphire Lodge, with ice sculptures and imported flowers that made my greenhouse collection look pedestrian. I wrote a check for $75,000 without hesitation. That's what mothers do. We give, we support, we celebrate. Brielle's parents, divorced and remarkably absent from her life, contributed nothing but criticism about the wine selection. Within a year of their marriage, Thaddeus approached me about their dream home, a modernist glass and steel structure on Everthorne's North Ridge, designed by some architect whose name Brielle dropped as though I should recognize it. The price, tag, $1, $2 million. "We've found exactly what we want, Mom," Thaddeus said over Sunday dinner, Brielle nodding beside him. "But the down payment is steeper than we expected." I didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" $300,000, Brielle answered before Thaddeus could open his mouth. "But we'd pay you back, of course." I waved away her words. "Nonsense. Consider it an early inheritance. I want you both to be happy." The truth was, seeing my son settled, building his own legacy, filled a hollow space Curtis's death had left inside me. My financial advisor, Ellery, had warned me about establishing patterns of dependency. But what did she know about a mother's heart? The money transferred the next day, no paperwork, no formal agreements, just faith and love. When they moved in, I helped them decorate. Well, I offered to help. Brielle had already hired a designer from Quebec who specialized in mindful minimalism, whatever that meant. My offers to share some of our family antiques were politely declined. "We're going for a very specific aesthetic," Brielle explained, looking at my grandfather's hand-carved chess table like it was yard sale refuse. Still, I made myself useful. When they mentioned converting part of their property into a garden, I spent weeks researching native plants that would thrive in that soil, even had special seeds imported from Japan. The plants arrived in small labeled packets, a rainbow of botanical possibility. I presented them proudly, explaining the growing seasons and care instructions for each variety. "These are lovely, Margot," Brielle said, setting them aside. "We've actually hired a landscape architect. He's done work for several celebrities in Aspen, but we'll definitely show him these. For inspiration. Those seed packets are probably still in a drawer somewhere, forgotten." The garden they eventually installed featured geometric concrete planters and a single variety of ornamental grass, repeated in rigid patterns. Not a flower in sight. Despite these small disappointments, I cherished my role in their lives. Every month, I transferred $8,000 into their joint account. "Just a little something to help with the mortgage," I'd say. Thaddeus would protest half-heartedly. Brielle never protested at all. I hosted Sunday dinners, helped them find a reliable housekeeper, even paid for Brielle's membership at Sapphire Springs Spa when she mentioned she was stressed about work. When they traveled to Morocco, Bali, and the Amalfi Coast, all documented meticulously on Brielle's social media accounts, I never questioned the expenses. After all, they were building memories, experiences. That's what life should be about. I kept myself busy too. I volunteered at the Everthorne Botanical Gardens 3 days a week, cataloging rare specimens and leading tours for schoolchildren who giggled at my enthusiasm for pollination patterns. I joined a book club filled with interesting women, some widowed like me, others simply seeking intellectual conversation. I was building a life that didn't revolve entirely around my son and his wife, but the holidays? Those were sacred. Ever. Since Thaddeus was born, Christmas had been our special time. Even during his college years, when he'd bring home roommates with nowhere else to go, we maintained our traditions. Homemade gingerbread on Christmas Eve, presents at dawn, and my special roast duck with orange glaze for dinner. When Curtis was alive, he'd play the piano while we sang carols badly but enthusiastically. After he died, the piano sat silent, but we kept every other tradition alive. The first Christmas after Thaddeus and Brielle married, they hosted at their new house. I brought the duck, my special cranberry relish, and my mother's antique serving dishes. The table looked beautiful, though Brielle seemed stressed about potential scratches on her imported dining table. The second Christmas was at my house, and though Brielle mentioned several times how exhausting the drive across town was in holiday traffic, we made it work. This would be our third Christmas as an expanded family, and planning had begun in BCE early November. I'd already ordered specialty ingredients, even found vintage ornaments that matched the winter white and gold theme Brielle had mentioned wanting for their tree this year. So when Thaddeus called that evening in early December, soil under my fingernails and orchids waiting to be tended, I wasn't prepared for what came next. "Mom, Brielle thinks it would be better if you didn't join us this year." The shock must have registered in my silence because he rushed to explain. "It's not personal, Mom. Brielle's cousin Lark is visiting from Switzerland with her husband and their twins. They'll be using the guest rooms, and with Brielle's parents both coming too, it's just going to be really crowded." "I could stay. In a hotel," I offered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "The Pinecone Inn is just down the road from you. Brielle feels that would defeat the whole purpose of intimate family time," Thaddeus replied, sounding like he was reciting memorized lines. "With the kids being so young, they need to stick to schedules, and having people coming and going would be disruptive." "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. "And what about our traditions? The gingerbread, the duck?" "Brielle's hiring a caterer this year, some farm-to-table chef from Aspen. Apparently he's been on one of those cooking shows." Thaddeus's voice brightened with forced enthusiasm. "It'll be a nice change, right? And you're always saying you work too hard during the holidays." I had never, not once, said any such thing. "We'll do something special after New Year's," he promised. "Just the three of us." After hanging up, I stood in the greenhouse for a long time, surrounded by the living things I'd nurtured, feeling more alone than I had since the day they lowered Curtis into the ground. The pain wasn't just about missing Christmas dinner. It was about being so easily set aside, an inconvenience to be managed rather than family to be embraced. That night, I pulled out photo albums, actual physical books filled with printed pictures, an anachronism in this digital age. There was Thaddeus on his first bicycle, his gap-toothed smile wide with pride. Thaddeus at his high school graduation, Curtis's arm around his shoulders. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thaddeus in his first apartment, surrounded by mismatched furniture we'd helped him collect from thrift stores. In every image, he looked directly at the camera, at me, with openness and affection. When had that changed? When had I become someone to manage rather than cherish? I poured myself a glass of Curtis's favorite scotch, something I did only on his birthday and their anniversary. The liquid burned pleasantly as I swirled it in the crystal tumbler we'd received as a wedding gift decades ago. "What would you do, Curtis?" I asked the empty room. The house creaked in response, old wood settling as temperatures dropped outside. The next morning, I woke with purpose. If I wasn't going to be part of their Christmas, I would create my own. I called Vivian from my book club, a spirited 70-something who'd been divorced 3 times and took no grief from anyone. "Of course they excluded you," she said when I explained the situation. "Brielle's been working toward this for years." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Oh, Margot," Vivian sighed. "You're brilliantly observant about everything except your own life. That girl has been systematically isolating Thaddeus since they met. Haven't you noticed how rarely he visits alone anymore? How they always have some reason to cut visits short? When's the last time he called you just to chat?" I wanted to protest, to defend them both, but the words died in my throat. Because Vivian was right. The casual drop-ins had stopped. Our conversations had grown shorter, more superficial. Somewhere along the way, my son had become a polite acquaintance rather than the person who knew me best in the world. "Come to my house for Christmas," Vivian offered. "My daughter Phoenix is bringing her new girlfriend. My ex-husband number 2 is coming with his current wife. We actually get along splendidly now that I'm not married to him. It'll be chaotic and probably inappropriate at times, but no one will be unwelcome." I thanked her, but declined. I needed to process this revelation, to understand what it meant for my future and my finances. That afternoon, I called Ellery, my financial advisor. We met the next day in her office overlooking Everthorne's small but charming downtown, where holiday decorations were already being strung across Main Street. "I need to make some changes," I told her, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. Ellery nodded, unsurprised. She'd been gently questioning my financial support of Thaddeus and Brielle for years. "What did they do?" she asked. "Simply." I explained about Christmas, about Brielle's cousin and the caterer and the intimate family time that somehow excluded me. Ellery listened without interrupting, then pulled up my financial records on her computer. "Margot, do you realize you've given Thaddeus and Brielle over $950,000 in the past 4 years? That's not including the monthly transfers or the various expenses you've covered." The number hit me like a physical blow. Nearly $1 million. Enough to fund several college educations, to support dozens of struggling families, to make meaningful change in causes I cared about. "I want to stop the monthly transfers," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. "And I want to restructure my estate plan." Over the next 2 hours, Ellery and I created a new financial roadmap. The monthly transfers would cease immediately. A substantial portion of my estate would go into a trust for any future grandchildren, accessible only for education, and only after they turned 25. Another portion would go to the Everthorne Botanical Gardens to establish a permanent education center. And for Thaddeus? We created a matching fund. Whatever he earned and saved himself, the trust would match up to a certain limit. He wouldn't inherit simply for being born my son. He would earn his legacy through his own efforts. He's going to be furious, I said, signing the documents with a hand that trembled slightly. Possibly, Ellery agreed, but perhaps it's time. He remembered the woman who raised him, the one who worked alongside Curtis building the small accounting firm that eventually funded all this generosity. You weren't always wealthy, Margot. You haven't forgotten what it means to work for something. Maybe it's time Thaddeus remembered that lesson too. As predicted, the first call came 3 days after the usual transfer date. I was in the greenhouse. Again, this time tending to my collection of succulents, desert plants that thrived on minimal care but delivered extraordinary beauty when properly tended. Mom, there seems to be some kind of banking error, Thaddeus said, skipping any greeting. The deposit didn't come through. There's no error, I replied, my voice steady. I've decided to discontinue the monthly transfers. Silence then. Is everything okay? Are you having financial problems? The concern in his voice sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse, because he wasn't asking if I was okay. He was asking if the money was okay. My finances are fine, I assured him. I've simply decided to reallocate my resources toward other priorities. What priorities? He asked, confusion evident. Is this about Christmas? Mom, I told you, it's just a logistical issue. We'll celebrate together after the holidays. This isn't about Christmas specifically, I said, though of course it was, at least in part. It's about recognizing that you and Brielle are adults with good jobs and a beautiful home. You don't need my financial support anymore. Another silence, longer this time. When Thaddeus spoke again, his voice had changed, hardened somehow. Did someone say something to you? Did Brielle offend you somehow? No one needed to say anything, I replied. I made this decision myself after considerable thought. I need to go, Thaddeus said abruptly. Brielle's calling me. We'll talk about this later. But we didn't talk about it later. Not that day, not the next. The silence from their modernist glass house on the ridge was absolute. December progressed. I threw myself into holiday preparations, not for them, but for myself. I decorated my home the way I liked it. A bit excessive, perhaps, with garlands on every banister and vintage ornaments crowding the 12-foot tree in the foyer. I baked cookies and distributed them to neighbors. I attended the Everthorne Christmas market and purchased handcrafted gifts for the botanical garden staff. A week before Christmas, I received a text message from Brielle. Are you free for coffee tomorrow? Just us girls. We met at Everbean, a local coffee shop that served excellent lavender lattes. Brielle arrived 15 minutes late, immaculately, dressed in a camel cashmere coat that probably cost more than most people in Everthorne earned in a month. Margot, it's so good to see you, she said, air kissing near my cheek. You look well. Thank you, Brielle. So do you. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather, unseasonably cold, the holiday crowds, insufferable, and her recent work trip to Los Angeles, exhausting but productive. She ordered a complicated coffee drink with numerous specifications, then fixed me with a direct gaze. Thaddeus is too proud to ask, but I'm not. What's going on with the money? No preamble, no attempt to ease into the conversation, just straight to the point. As I told Thaddeus, I've decided to discontinue the monthly support, I replied calmly. But why now? She pressed. Nothing has changed. Precisely my point. Nothing has changed in 4 years. You and Thaddeus still rely on my support despite having excellent jobs and no children. At some point, that support becomes enabling rather than helpful. Brielle's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose fractionally. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We don't rely on your money. We appreciate it. There's a difference. If you don't rely on it, then its absence shouldn't cause distress, I pointed out. It's not distress, she countered, her voice cooling several degrees. It's confusion. This seems so sudden and, frankly, punitive. It's neither sudden nor punitive, I said. It's a necessary recalibration. You and Thaddeus need to live within your actual means, not means artificially inflated by my contributions. Brielle's composure slipped, just slightly. A tightening around her eyes, a quick drum of manicured nails against the table. Is this about Christmas? Because we can work something out if it's that important to you. The casual dismissal in her tone told me everything. Christmas with me wasn't a priority. It was a concession she might graciously make to restore the flow of money. This isn't about Christmas, I lied. Though I find it interesting that's where your mind went immediately. She sighed, a practiced sound of exasperation. Margot, we're family. Families support each other. Families forgive minor miscommunications. Yes, they do, I agreed. And families include each other in important celebrations without having to be bribed. A flush crept up her neck. That's completely unfair. We had legitimate space constraints. Lark's twins are absolute monsters, frankly, but they're family. As am I reminded her quietly. She stared at me for a long moment, then gathered her designer handbag. I can see you're determined to misunderstand. I'll let Thaddeus know. We talked. Perhaps he'll have better luck explaining our perspective. After she left, I sat nursing my cooling tea, wondering what perspective Thaddeus might offer that would justify excluding me from a holiday I'd celebrated with him for 33 consecutive years. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, my doorbell rang insistently. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see Thaddeus's silhouette, shoulders hunched against the cold. I opened the door, and my son burst in without waiting for an invitation, bringing with him the scent of winter air and expensive cologne. "Mom, what did you say to Brielle?" he demanded, shrugging off his coat and tossing it over the entryway bench. She came home completely upset. "I simply explained my decision about the monthly transfers," I replied, closing the door against the chill. "Would you like some tea?" "I just put the kettle on." "I don't want tea," he snapped, following me into the kitchen anyway. "I want to understand what's going on with you. First, you cut off financial support without warning. Then you make Brielle feel like she's done something terrible." "Has she done something terrible?" I interrupted, genuinely curious about his perception. He looked momentarily confused. "Of course not. She's been nothing but welcoming to you." "Welcoming," I repeated, testing the word like a loose tooth. "Is that how you'd describe excluding me from Christmas?" Thaddeus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Curtis that my heart ached. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You're punishing us because we needed one holiday to ourselves. To yourselves and Brielle's cousin from Switzerland, and her husband, and their twins, and both her parents," I clarified. "That's quite a lot of people for someone wanting holiday solitude." Thaddeus had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The situation is complicated." "It's not complicated at all," I corrected him gently. "I've become an inconvenience rather than a priority. That's your prerogative, but it does change our relationship, which in turn changes our financial arrangement." "That's emotional blackmail," he accused, color rising in his face. The kettle whistled shrilly, and I turned to silence it, using the moment to compose myself. When I faced him again, I felt calm, certain. "No, Thaddeus. Emotional blackmail would be threatening to withhold love or approval unless you included me. I'm not doing that. I love you regardless of where you spend Christmas. I'm simply adjusting my financial support to match the reality of our relationship." "And what reality is that?" he demanded. "The reality where I'm important enough to..." Fund your lifestyle, but not important enough to make space for at your holiday table. He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair. Perhaps not, I conceded. But neither is expecting me to continue financially supporting adults who increasingly treat me as an afterthought. Thaddeus stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a language he didn't understand. In a way, I had. For years I'd spoken the language of unconditional giving. Now I was speaking about boundaries, about reciprocity, about respect. These were foreign concepts in our relationship. So that's it? He finally asked. You're just cutting us off because we asked for one Christmas alone? I'm discontinuing monthly financial support because you and Brielle are capable adults who should be self-sufficient, I corrected him. And I'm recognizing that our relationship has changed through choices we've all made. He left shortly after, without the tea I'd offered, without resolving anything. As I watched his car's taillights disappear down the winding driveway, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation I'd dreaded was over, and I'd held my ground. The price was distance from my only child, but perhaps that distance had been growing long before tonight. The days before Christmas passed quietly. I received no further calls or visits from Thaddeus or Brielle. On December 23rd, I volunteered at the Everthorne Community Center, helping serve dinner to families in need. On Christmas Eve, I attended the candlelight service at the small stone church in town, then returned home to make my traditional gingerbread, just for myself this year. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. I made coffee, opened the few gifts sent by friends, and prepared to spend the day exactly as I pleased, reading by the fire, perhaps watching one of Curtis's favorite old films, definitely enjoying a glass or two of good wine. I was still in my robe when the doorbell rang shortly after noon. I wasn't expecting anyone, had explicitly turned down Vivienne's renewed invitation so I could process my emotions in solitude. When I opened the door, Brielle stood on my doorstep, looking less composed than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her clothes noticeably casual, leggings and an oversized sweater rather than her usual tailored perfection. "Merry Christmas, Margot," she said, her voice subdued. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, curiosity overriding any desire to turn her away. "Of course. Is everything all right? Is Thaddeus okay?" "He's fine," she assured me, stepping into the warm foyer. "He's at home. He doesn't know I'm here." That was unusual enough to heighten my concern. "Would you like coffee? Tea? Something stronger?" "Tea would be wonderful," she said, following me to the kitchen where the remnants of my solitary breakfast still sat on the counter. I busied myself with the kettle and teapot, hyper-aware of Brielle perched awkwardly on one of the bar stools, looking around my kitchen like she was seeing it for the first time. "You have a beautiful home," she said finally. "I don't think I've ever really told you that." "Thank you," I replied, measuring loose tea into the infuser. "Curtis and I loved creating it together." "I can see that," she said softly. "There's history in every corner." I placed a steaming mug before her. "Brielle, while I appreciate the Christmas visit, I'm guessing you didn't come here to discuss my decor." She wrapped her hands around the mug, seeming to draw strength from its warmth. "No, I didn't." She took a deep breath. "I came to tell you the truth about Christmas." I waited, watching emotions flicker across her face. Embarrassment, defiance, resignation. "There is no cousin from Switzerland," she admitted finally. "Lark exists, but she's spending the holidays in St. Moritz. My parents aren't coming either. They're cruising the Caribbean, separately, of course." Though I'd suspected something wasn't right about their story, the blatant nature of the lie still stung. "I see. And the reason for this fabrication?" Brielle looked down at her tea. "The matching fund." "I don't understand," I said, though a sick feeling in my stomach suggested otherwise. Thaddeus found out about your estate changes, she explained, still not meeting my eyes. Your lawyer called to confirm some details, and apparently his assistant left a message on our home phone instead of your cell. Thaddeus heard it. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. So the Christmas exclusion was my idea, she admitted, finally looking up. I thought if we created some distance, made you feel a little isolated, you might reconsider the changes, especially the matching fund stipulation. Thaddeus hasn't built his own savings. Everything goes toward our lifestyle. There would be nothing to match. The calculated nature of their rejection left me momentarily speechless. They hadn't excluded me because they wanted privacy or because of logistical constraints. They'd excluded me as a manipulation tactic, a way to punish me for daring to put conditions on my generosity. Why are you telling me this now? I asked when I could trust my voice again. Because it was wrong, she said simply. And because it didn't work. You didn't come begging to be included. You didn't reverse your decision about the monthly transfers. You just accepted it and moved on with your life. What did you expect me to do? Honestly, I expected you to cave. You always have before. There was no malice in her observation, just a matter-of-fact assessment of our history. Every time Thaddeus has needed something, you've provided it without question. Every time I've hinted at wanting something, it appears. I thought this would be the same. I considered her words, recognizing their truth. I had created this dynamic through years of unquestioning generosity. I'd taught them to see me as a resource rather than a person with my own needs and feelings. Why tell me now? I asked again. You could have maintained the lie. Brielle set down her mug. Because I woke up this morning and couldn't bear it anymore. We're sitting in that sterile house, surrounded by things we can't afford, with no one to share Christmas with. Thaddeus is miserable but too proud to admit it. And I realized I've become someone I don't recognize or particularly like. Her honesty was unexpected, and I had to admit, somewhat refreshing. This was the most authentic conversation we'd ever had. What do you want from me, Brielle? I asked. Nothing, she said quickly, then reconsidered. No, that's not true. I want a chance to start over. Not financially, you were right about that. We need to stand on our own. But personally, I want a chance to know you as Thaddeus's mother, not as our benefactor. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none. Just exhaustion and something that looked remarkably like hope. Does Thaddeus share this sentiment? I asked. He doesn't know I'm here, she reminded me. But he's been staring at old photo albums for days, looking at pictures of the two of you. He misses you. He's just too stubborn to admit he's wrong. A trait he comes by honestly, I acknowledged with a small smile. His father was exactly the same way. Brielle returned the smile tentatively. Will you come for dinner? Today? It won't be anything fancy. We canceled the caterer when we realized our lie was ridiculous. I was going to attempt a roast, but honestly, I'm a terrible cook. The invitation hung between us, fragile as a soap bubble. I could refuse, could send her back to that glass house on the ridge to face the consequences of their actions. It would be justified. Even expected. But what would that accomplish beyond extending the hurt on all sides? I have a better idea, I said, coming to a decision. Why don't you go home, get Thaddeus, and come back here? I have a duck that needs roasting and gingerbread that needs decorating. We can start new traditions today, ones based on honesty. Tears filled Brielle's eyes, catching me off guard. In 4 years, I'd never seen her cry. You'd do that? After what we did? Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt didn't happen, I told her. It means choosing to move forward despite it. I'm not naive enough to think one Christmas dinner will fix everything, but it's a place to start. After she left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, processing the conversation. The manipulation hurt deeply. The casual cruelty of excluding me for financial leverage would take time to heal. But underneath the pain was a curious sense of optimism. For the first time, Brielle had seen me, really seen me, as something more than an ATM. And perhaps, for the first time, I'd seen her as something more than the woman who'd taken my son. I changed out of my robe, put the duck in to roast, and set the table for 3. Whether they would actually return was uncertain, but I was prepared either way. If they came, we would begin the slow, complicated work of building a real relationship. If they didn't, I would enjoy my duck and my solitude, secure in the knowledge that I'd offered grace when justified anger would have been easier. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. Through the beveled glass, I could see 2 silhouettes, one tall and straight, the other with the slope-shouldered posture I'd recognize anywhere as my son's. I opened the door to whatever came next. The winter sun cast long shadows across my dining room as Thaddeus and Brielle settled into their chairs. The tension was palpable, crackling between us like static electricity. Thaddeus hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since arriving, his eyes carefully avoiding mine as he meticulously arranged his napkin on his lap. Brielle, by contrast, seemed determined to fill every silence with cheerful commentary about the table settings, the aroma of roasting duck, the beauty of my Christmas decorations, anything to distract from the unspoken conflict simmering beneath the surface. I placed the carved duck on the table, its skin crisp and golden, surrounded by caramelized fruits. The familiar ritual of serving food provided a momentary reprieve from the awkwardness. "This looks wonderful, Margot," Brielle said, her voice pitched slightly too high. "I can't believe you prepared all this on such short notice." "I was already cooking for myself," I replied, serving her a portion. The duck was always part of my plan. Thaddeus finally looked at me directly. "You were going to make a whole duck just for yourself?" "Yes," I said simply. "Just because I'm alone doesn't mean I don't deserve to celebrate properly." A shadow crossed his face at the word alone. Good. Let him sit with that discomfort for a moment. We ate in strained silence, punctuated by Brielle's increasingly desperate attempts at small talk. The food was excellent. Curtis's recipe never failed, but it might as well have been sawdust for all the pleasure anyone took in it. I waited, letting the silence do its work. Eventually, one of them would break. It was Thaddeus who finally cracked. Midway through the meal, he set down his fork with a clatter that made Brielle jump. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," he said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "Which elephant would that be?" I asked mildly. "The lie about Christmas guests, or the discovery of my estate changes, or the manipulation intended to make me reverse those changes?" "Oh," Thaddeus flinched. "Brielle told you everything then." "She did." I took a sip of wine. It was the first honest conversation we've had in 4 years. He looked wounded by that assessment, but he didn't deny it. Progress, perhaps. "I was angry," he admitted. "Finding out about the estate changes that way. It felt like a betrayal." "More or less of a betrayal than fabricating a reason to exclude me from Christmas?" I countered. Brielle set down her glass. "That was my idea, Margot. Don't blame Thaddeus entirely." "I don't blame either of you entirely," I said. "But I don't absolve either of you entirely either." Thaddeus pushed his plate away, food half-eaten. "What do you want from us, Mom? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry we lied about Christmas. I'm sorry we tried to manipulate you. But you blindsided us with these financial changes after years of consistent support. What were we supposed to think?" "You were supposed to think that I'm a person with valid feelings and boundaries," I replied calmly. "You were supposed to talk to me directly instead of concocting schemes. You were supposed to act like adults who can manage their own finances instead of children who are entitled to an allowance in perpetuity." His face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Brielle placed a restraining hand on his arm. "She's right, Thad," she said quietly. "We've been treating your mother like a resource, not a person." The simple acknowledgement diffused some of the tension in the room. Thaddeus deflated slightly, the angry retort dying on his lips. "I didn't make those estate changes to punish you," I told him. "I made them because I believe in you, in your capability to build your own legacy instead of simply inheriting mine." "The matching fund feels punitive," he muttered. "It's actually an expression of faith," I corrected him. "Faith that you can and will create your own success as your father and I did. We didn't start with wealth, Thaddeus. We built it together, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice." He looked up sharply. "You think I don't make sacrifices?" "I think you've become accustomed to a lifestyle that exceeds what you earn," I said gently. "That's not a judgment. It's mathematics. And it's at least partially my fault for enabling it." Brielle nodded slowly. "That's fair. We spend like we make 3 times our actual income." Thaddeus shot her a betrayed look, which she met steadily. "It's true, Thad. We do." The honesty between them surprised me. Perhaps there was more substance to their relationship than I'd given them credit for. "So what now?" Thaddeus asked, his defensive posture softening slightly. "You've cut off the monthly support, you've changed your estate plan. What else should we expect?" "That depends on what you want moving forward," I said. "If you're only interested in financial support, then yes, things have changed permanently. But if you're interested in a relationship based on mutual respect and honesty, that door remains open." Thaddeus stared at me for a long moment. "I don't know if I know how to have that kind of relationship with you anymore. You've always been the person who fixes everything, who provides everything. I don't know how to just be your son without also being your, I don't know, beneficiary." The raw admission broke my heart a little. What had I done to my child? To make him believe his value to me was tied to his need for my resources? "Maybe it's time we both learned," I suggested softly. "Maybe we start by simply spending time together without any expectations or transactions. Just 2 adults who happen to be family, getting to know each other again." Brielle squeezed Thaddeus's hand. "I think that sounds wonderful." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, we can try that." The meal concluded with marginally less tension. We didn't move to the living room for carols or storytelling as we might have in years past, but we did manage to finish dessert with something approaching normal conversation. When they left, Thaddeus hugged me. Briefly, awkwardly, but sincerely. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Thank you for the meal." "Merry Christmas, Thaddeus," I replied, resisting the urge to smooth his hair as I had when he was small. "We'll talk soon." After they departed, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation, the tentative reconciliation, it had taken more out of me than I'd realized. I cleaned the kitchen methodically, wrapping, leftovers and washing Crystal by hand, finding comfort in the familiar rituals. Later, curled in Curtis's old reading chair with a final glass of wine, I felt his absence keenly. He would have known exactly what to say to Thaddeus, would have found the perfect balance of firmness and compassion. "I'm doing my best here, Curtis," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope it's enough." January arrived with a blanket of fresh snow and the promise of new beginnings. I threw myself into my volunteer work at the Everthorne Botanical Gardens, helping to plan the spring exhibition on endangered alpine species. My book club resumed after the holiday hiatus, bringing welcome intellectual stimulation and the warmth of female friendship. Thaddeus called twice during the first week of January, brief, somewhat stilted conversations about nothing in particular. He was trying, in his own way. Brielle sent a handwritten thank you note for Christmas dinner, surprising me with its apparent sincerity. Baby steps toward a new normal. The real test came in mid-January when my kitchen sink developed a persistent leak. In the past, I would have immediately called Thaddeus, who would have dropped everything to help, partly out of genuine concern, partly to maintain the dynamic of being needed. This time, I called a plumber instead. He arrived promptly the next morning, Casimir Novak, according to the name embroidered on his work shirt. He was perhaps in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and hands that spoke of decades of practical work. "Leaky sink, eh?" he said, following me to the kitchen. "Let's take a look." He worked efficiently, explaining the problem and the repair in clear terms without condescension. When he finished, he declined my offer of coffee. "Got 3 more calls to make today," he explained with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Winter is hard on old pipes." I wrote him a check, adding a generous tip. "Thank you for fitting me in so quickly." "My pleasure, Mrs. Whitley." He packed his tools with practiced precision. "By the way, those orchids in your greenhouse, Phalaenopsis, right? My mother used to grow them back in Croatia. Never seen such healthy specimens in this climate." His observation caught me by surprise. "You know orchids?" He shrugged modestly. "Know a little about a lot of things. Comes with the territory when you've been fixing people's problems for 30 years. After he left, I found myself thinking about his comment. Fixing people's problems. Isn't that what I'd always done for Thaddeus? Fix, provide, smooth the path. I'd built my identity around being necessary, around being the solution to every difficulty. Perhaps that was the real issue, not just Thaddeus's and Brielle's expectations, but my own need to be needed. Curtis had often teased me about my savior complex, my compulsion to solve everyone else's problems. I'd always laughed it off, but now I wondered if he'd identified something fundamental about my character, something that had contributed to our current situation just as much as any entitlement on Thaddeus's part. These thoughts were still percolating when Vivian called, inviting me to a small dinner party the following weekend. "Nothing fancy," she assured me. "Just a few friends, good food, better wine. You need to get out more, Margot. That big house is swallowing you up." I started to decline automatically, then caught myself. Why not? Why not spend an evening with interesting adults who expected nothing from me beyond conversation and companionship? "I'd love to come," I said, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. "Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Vivian replied, "and maybe that spectacular cranberry relish you made for the garden club luncheon last fall." The dinner party proved to be exactly what I needed: stimulating conversation, delicious food, and the kind of relaxed camaraderie that comes from people with no agenda beyond enjoying each other's company. Vivian had assembled an eclectic group: a retired literature professor from the community college, a glass artist whose work was featured in galleries across the Northwest, a wildlife biologist studying wolf populations in the Sapphire Mountains, and to my surprise, Casimir the plumber. "Kaz is my neighbor," Vivian explained when I raised an eyebrow at his presence. "And the best dinner guest you could ask for. He actually listens when other people talk, a rare quality these days." The evening flowed pleasantly from aperitifs in Vivian's art-filled living room to dinner at her massive farmhouse table. I found myself seated between Casimir and the wildlife biologist Naomi, drawn into a fascination discussion about the seasonal adaptations of native plants. "The serviceberry along the river trails puts out early blossoms that can withstand frost," Naomi explained, gesturing with her fork for emphasis. "It's evolved to take advantage of the brief pollination window before competing species bloom." "Like getting a head start on the competition," Casimir commented with a smile. "Smart plant." "Nature is remarkably adaptive," I agreed. In the botanical garden, we've been documenting how climate shifts are affecting bloom times. Some species are flowering nearly 2 weeks earlier than they did a decade ago. The conversation meandered pleasantly from there, touching on everything from classical music to the town's contentious debate over a proposed luxury resort development. Politics made a brief appearance but was gently steered toward less divisive topics by our hostess, who believed good food and good wine deserved better accompaniment than argument. As the evening wound down, I found myself on Vivienne's porch with Casimir, both of us admiring the clear winter sky blazing with stars. "You don't see them like this in the city," he remarked, breath fogging in the cold air. "That's one thing I never regretted about moving here after my divorce, the stars at night." "How long have you lived in Everthorne?" I asked. "Coming up on 8 years," he replied. "Moved here after 30 years in Seattle. Needed a change after Marta left. Too many memories in that house, you know." I nodded, understanding completely. "My husband passed 5 years ago. Sometimes I think about selling the house, starting fresh somewhere else. But then I walk through the garden he planted, or sit in his reading chair, and I can't imagine leaving those memories behind." He glanced at me with quiet empathy. "Not all memories need leaving behind, just the ones that keep you stuck." Something about his simple observation resonated deeply. Wasn't that precisely what I'd been doing with Thaddeus? Clinging to memories of his childhood, trying to preserve a dynamic that he had long outgrown? The monthly transfers, the constant availability, the unquestioning support, all attempts to maintain a relationship that no longer existed, that perhaps shouldn't exist between adults. The realization must have shown on my face because Casimir touched my arm lightly. "I've said something that upset you." "No," I assured him. "You've said something true, which is different. I've been holding on to versions of relationships that don't exist anymore." He nodded, seeming to understand without needing further explanation. It's the hardest thing, letting go of who we thought people were, or who we wanted them to be. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching our breath cloud and dissipate in the winter air. "I should get home," I said finally. "Thank you for the conversation." "My pleasure, Mrs. Whitley." "Margot," I corrected him. He smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "Margot, then. And I'm Kaz to my friends." I drove home through the quiet streets of Everthorne, the houses dark except for the occasional porch light or illuminated window. The conversation, with Casimir, with Kaz, had shifted something inside me, crystallized thoughts that had been forming since Christmas. I had been holding Thaddeus locked in the amber of childhood, refusing to fully acknowledge his adulthood because it threatened my role as protector and provider. Yes, he and Brielle had acted entitled and manipulative, but I had set the stage for that behavior through years of unquestioning support, of solving problems that weren't mine to solve. The next morning, I called Thaddeus and invited him to lunch. Just him, no Brielle. We met at Riverstone, a small cafe overlooking Everthorne's modest river walk. It was neutral territory, neither my home nor his, a place where we could meet as equals. He arrived precisely on time, dressed in what I recognized as his business casual attire: dark jeans, a button-down shirt under a camel-colored sweater. His hair was freshly cut, his expression guarded but not hostile. Small victories. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as we settled at a corner table. "Of course," he replied, studying the menu intently. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just wanted to talk, just the two of us." We ordered a Cobb salad for him, butternut squash soup for me, and engaged in careful small talk until the food arrived. Then, fortified by the warm soup, I broached the real purpose of our meeting. "I owe you an apology," I began. His head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "You owe me an apology? For what?" "For not letting you grow up," I said simply. "For continuing to treat you like a child who needs my protection and support, rather than an adult capable of making his own decisions and living with the consequences." He set down his fork, visibly confused. "I'm not following." The monthly transfers, the down payment, all the financial support, it wasn't just generosity, Thaddeus. It was a way of keeping you dependent, of maintaining my role as the all-providing mother. The admission was difficult but necessary. I enabled the dynamic that led to Christmas, that led to all of it. He was silent for a long moment, processing my words. So you're saying it's your fault that Brielle and I lied to you? No, I clarified. You're adults who made choices, and those choices were wrong. But I helped create the conditions where those choices seemed reasonable to you. I've been treating you as less capable than you are for years, and that's on me. He stared out the window at the river, its surface glittering in the winter sunlight. I don't know what to do with this, Mom. First, you cut off financial support. Then you change your estate plan. Now you're apologizing for having supported me in the first place. It feels like, I don't know, whiplash. I understand, I acknowledged. It's a lot of change very quickly, but I'm not apologizing for having supported you. I'm apologizing for the way that support undermined your independence, your confidence in your own abilities. So what now? He asked, echoing his question from Christmas dinner. What does this mean going forward? It means I'd like to try something different, I said. A relationship based on mutual respect and shared experiences, not financial. Dependency. I'd like to get to know the man you've become, not just preserve the boy you were. He looked skeptical. And practically speaking? The monthly transfers are still done? Yes, I confirmed. That hasn't changed. But my attitude has. I no longer see providing for you as my primary role or responsibility. I want to be your mother, Thaddeus, not your bank. He absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. It's going to be an adjustment, he admitted finally. For all of us. Brielle and I have been talking a lot since Christmas, about our finances, about our expectations, about the kind of people we want to be. He hesitated, then added, She's looking for a new job, something more stable, less focused on status. And I've been thinking about Dad's old business model, how he built something sustainable rather than flashy. The mention of Curtis's approach to business, methodical, ethical, focused on long-term relationships rather than quick profits, surprised and pleased me. Thaddeus had always seemed impatient with his father's conservative business philosophy, eager for faster growth and bigger returns. Your father would be proud to hear that, I said softly. Maybe, Thaddeus acknowledged. He always did try to tell me that slow and steady wins the race. He smiled slightly. I never was very good at listening. You get that from me, I admitted. Curtis always said I was the most stubborn woman he'd ever met. He meant it as a compliment, Thaddeus said. He admired your determination. I know he did. The shared memory of Curtis felt like a bridge between us, spanning the chasm that had opened in recent years. We finished our meal in a more comfortable silence. The air between us cleared of at least some of the tension that had accumulated. When the check came, I reached for it automatically, then stopped myself. Would you mind if we split it? I asked instead. He looked startled, then nodded. Sure, that's fine. It was a small thing, trivial really. But as we each placed our credit cards on the small tray, it felt symbolic. A shift from the automatic expectation that I would provide to a more balanced interaction. A baby step toward a healthier relationship. Outside the cafe, we paused on the sidewalk, awkward again now that the structured framework of a meal was behind us. Thank you for lunch, he said formally. And for the conversation. It gives me a lot to think about. Me too, I assured him. This is new territory for both of us. He nodded, then surprised me by leaning in for a brief hug. I'll call you soon, he promised. Maybe we can do this again next week. I watched him walk to his car, his posture straighter than it had been at Christmas, less defensive. Progress, however small. Back at home, I found a message on my answering machine. From Vivian, thanking me for coming to dinner and mentioning casually that Casimir had asked for my number. I told him he'd have to ask you himself, but I thought you should know he's interested. In case you're interested too. I found myself smiling at the message, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. It had been so long since anyone had expressed interest in me as a woman, not just as a mother or a widow or a source of financial support. The feeling was both foreign and familiar, like returning to a favorite book after many years and discovering new layers of meaning. Later that afternoon, I was in the greenhouse transplanting seedlings when my phone rang. The number wasn't one. I recognized, but something prompted me to answer rather than let it go to voicemail. Mrs. Whitley, it's Casimir Novak, Kaz, from Vivian's dinner party. He sounded slightly nervous, which was oddly endearing. I hope you don't mind me calling. Vivian gave me your number. I don't mind at all, I assured him. And please, it's Margot. Margot, he repeated, as if testing the name. I was wondering if you might be interested in getting coffee sometime. Or tea, if you prefer. There's a new place downtown that specializes in loose leaf varieties from around the world. The invitation was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Tea? Sounds lovely, I said, surprising myself with how easily the acceptance came. When were you thinking? We arranged to meet the following afternoon. After hanging up, I stood in the greenhouse for a long moment, aware of a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't excitement exactly, more like possibility. The feeling that my life wasn't fixed in amber, that there were still doors to open, paths to explore. That evening, Thaddeus called, his voice tentative but determined. Mom? About what you said at lunch, about a different kind of relationship. I've been thinking. Would you be interested in visiting the property Brielle and I are considering, for a smaller house? It's nothing fancy, just a simple place closer to town, but I'd value your opinion. The invitation touched me deeply, not because he needed my financial support or approval, but because he genuinely wanted my perspective. It was a small gesture, but meaningful, an olive branch, a step toward the relationship I'd described at lunch. I'd love to see it, I told him. Thank you for asking. After we hung up, I sat in Curtis's reading chair, watching darkness claim the winter landscape outside my window. The day had brought unexpected developments, a frank conversation with my son, an invitation from an intriguing man, the sense that I was finally moving forward instead of holding desperately to the past. Progress, Curtis, I murmured to the empty room. Not perfection, but progress. The next morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching a pair of cardinals flit among the bare branches of the maple tree Curtis had planted on our 10th anniversary. The vibrant red of the male against the snow-white background was startling, a splash of vitality in the winter landscape. Movement at the end of my driveway caught my attention. A familiar car was turning in, moving slowly on the snow-covered surface. Thaddeus's car, unexpected at this early hour. I set down my coffee and moved to the front door, opening it just as he reached the porch. His face was grave, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept. Thaddeus? What's wrong? He didn't answer immediately, just stood there in the cold, breath clouding around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I need to tell you something, Mom. Something important. About Brielle. About everything. I stepped back, opening the door wider. Come inside. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. He nodded, crossing the threshold into the warmth of the house. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a curious blend of concern and calm. Whatever revelation he brought, whatever confession or crisis loomed, we would face it as adults, not as benefactor and dependent, but as mother and son, navigating a new relationship built on honesty rather than expectation. The path forward wouldn't be smooth. Real growth never is. But for the first time in years, I felt we were walking in the right direction. Thaddeus paced the length of my living room, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors Curtis had installed decades ago. The morning light streamed through the east-facing windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in his wake. I waited patiently in my armchair, giving him the space to gather his thoughts. Whatever he needed to tell me, it clearly wasn't easy. Finally, he stopped pacing and turned to face me. His expression a complex mixture of shame, anger, and something else. Relief, perhaps, at finally unburdening himself. "Brielle's been having an affair," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "With her boss, for over a year now." The revelation landed between us like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples of silence across the room. I absorbed the information, considering its implications, the pain it must have caused him. "I'm so sorry, Thaddeus," I said finally. "When did you find out?" He sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. 3 months ago, right before Thanksgiving. The timing struck me like a physical blow. 3 months? You've known since before the holidays? He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I confronted her when I found text messages on her phone. She denied it at first, then admitted everything. Said it was just physical, that it didn't mean anything. His laugh was hollow, bitter, as if that made it better somehow. I struggled to reconcile this new information with everything that had happened since Thanksgiving. But you stayed together. You presented a united front about Christmas, about the financial changes. "I was trying to save our marriage," he said defensively. "Brielle promised it was over with him. She cried, said she couldn't bear to lose me. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her." "And was it over?" I asked gently. He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "No. I found out last night that it never stopped. All those late meetings, business trips, she was with him the whole time. Even Christmas Day after we left. Your house?" She made an excuse about needing something from her office. His voice broke. She was meeting him while I was home researching marriage counselors. I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, close but not touching, respecting the fragility of the moment. "I'm truly sorry, Thaddeus. No one deserves that kind of betrayal. The worst part isn't even the affair," he continued, his voice steadying. "It's that I've been building my entire life, our entire life, on a foundation that wasn't real. The house, the lifestyle, the image we projected, none of it was authentic. It was all for show, all to maintain this facade of success and happiness." His words resonated with my own recent realizations. "Appearances can be deceiving," I agreed, softly, "even to ourselves." He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You tried to tell me, in your way. All those conversations about sustainability, about building something real. I just wasn't ready to hear it." "We hear things when we're ready," I said, "not a moment before." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "There's more, Mom. Something I need to show you." He handed me the paper, which I unfolded carefully. It was a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize, in Brielle's name only. The balance was substantial, over $400,000. "I found this when I was looking for evidence of the affair," Thaddeus explained. "She's been siphoning money from our joint account for years. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers once she realized I never checked the statements." I studied the document, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "This is more than just saving for herself. This is theft," he finished for me. "From me, from us. And that's not all." He took a deep breath. Remember that down payment you gave us for the house? The $300,000? I nodded, already anticipating what was coming. Only $150,000 actually went toward the house, he admitted, shame coloring his voice. Brielle convinced me to invest the rest in her friend's startup company, a company that, it turns out, doesn't exist. The money went straight to her friend's new yacht. The scale of the deception was staggering. Not just an affair, but financial betrayal as well. I thought of all the money I'd given them over the years, the monthly transfers, the extra gifts and contributions. How much had actually gone toward their life together, and how much had been diverted to Brielle's secret account or her friend's fraudulent schemes? Does she know you've discovered the account? I asked. He shook his head. No. After I found out about the affair continuing, I didn't confront her. I just started digging. I found the account statements in a locked drawer in her home office. She thinks I'm at a client meeting right now. I considered his situation from all angles. The marriage was clearly over. The trust had been irreparably broken. But the financial entanglement would be complex and potentially devastating. Have you spoken with a lawyer? I asked. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. He hesitated, then continued. I know I've been awful to you, Mom. I've taken your generosity for granted, participated in Brielle's schemes to manipulate you, behaved like an entitled child instead of a grateful son. I wouldn't blame you if you told me to handle this mess on my own, but I could really use your advice right now. His vulnerability, his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes, touched me deeply. This wasn't the entitled young man who had stood in my kitchen at Christmas, defensive and accusatory. This was my son, hurt and seeking guidance. Of course I'll help you, I assured him. First, we need to secure your finances. Any joint accounts need to be frozen or emptied before Brielle realizes you know. Then we need to document everything. The affair, the financial deception, all of it. It will matter in the divorce proceedings. He flinched at the word divorce, but nodded. You're right. It's over. It has been for a long time. I just didn't want to see it. I squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is face the truth, even when it hurts. We spent the morning making calls, to his bank, to a divorce attorney recommended by Ellery, to a locksmith who could change the locks on their home while Brielle was at work. I marveled at Thaddeus's clarity, his determination. The shock and hurt were still there, evident in the tightness around his eyes and the occasional tremor in his voice, but he was moving forward with purpose. By noon, we had a plan in place. Thaddeus would return home, pack what he needed, and move into a furnished apartment downtown that, fortunately, had immediate availability. He would file for divorce the following day, with the evidence of Brielle's infidelity and financial malfeasance clearly documented. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided according to actual contribution rather than the usual equal split. As he prepared to leave, Thaddeus hesitated at the door. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Of course, I replied. How did you know? With Dad, I mean. How did you know it was real, that you could trust him completely? The question caught me off guard. Thaddeus rarely spoke of Curtis directly, especially not in terms of their relationship. I thought carefully before answering. Your father and I built trust over time, I said finally. It wasn't something that existed automatically. It was something we created together, decision by decision, year by year. There were moments of doubt, of course. That's natural in any long-term relationship. But the foundation was solid because we prioritized honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Thaddeus nodded, absorbing this. I don't think Brielle and I ever had that foundation. We had attraction, ambition, a shared image we wanted to project, but not honesty. Not really. Then perhaps, painful as this is, it's also an opportunity, I suggested. A chance to rebuild your life on more authentic terms. He managed a small smile. Maybe. I'm not ready to think about silver linings just yet, but maybe someday. He leaned in to hug me, a real embrace, not the perfunctory gesture he'd offered at Christmas. Thank you, Mom, for everything. After he left, I sat in the quiet house, processing the morning's revelations. The scale of Brielle's deception was shocking, but not entirely surprising. There had always been something calculated about her interactions, a sense that she was performing rather than simply being. I'd attributed it to social anxiety, to the pressure of marrying into a family with means. Now I recognized it as something more sinister, the careful maintenance of a facade, hiding her true agenda. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Casimir, confirming our tea date that afternoon. For a moment I considered canceling, telling him I needed to be available for Thaddeus. But then I reconsidered. My son was an adult handling a difficult situation with newfound maturity. Being constantly available, dropping everything whenever he needed me, wasn't that exactly the dynamic I was trying to change? I'm looking forward to it, I told Casimir, surprised to find it was true despite the morning's drama. 3 o'clock still works perfectly. Everleaf Tea House occupied a corner storefront in downtown Everthorne. Its large windows steamed with condensation that blurred the winter landscape outside. The interior was warm and inviting, with mismatched vintage furniture arranged in conversational groupings and shelves lined with glass jars containing teas from around the world. Casimir was already seated when I arrived, rising politely as I approached. He had exchanged his work clothes for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that complemented his silver hair. The effect was quietly dignified without being stuffy. Margot, he greeted me, his expression warming. I'm glad you could make it. So am I replied, settling into the armchair across from him. Though I must admit, it's been quite a day already. He tilted his head, studying my face. Family troubles? He guessed. I nodded, not surprised by his perception. My son is going through a difficult time. His marriage is ending rather dramatically. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, and I could tell he meant it. Would you prefer to reschedule? I'd understand completely. No, I said firmly. I'm exactly where I want to be. His smile deepened, revealing a small dimple in his left cheek that I hadn't noticed before. In that case, what kind of tea can I tempt you with? The oolong is exceptional, and they have a house blend with jasmine and ginger that's quite remarkable. We ordered tea and a plate of small pastries, settling into conversation that flowed more easily than I had expected. Casimir spoke of his life in Seattle, his career as a master plumber which had evolved into owning a small but successful contracting business, his decision to sell everything and move to Everthorne after his divorce. 30 years of marriage, he said, turning his teacup slowly in his hands. It's a long time to be with someone, to build a life together. When it ended, I felt like I'd lost my identity along with my wife. I understand that completely, I told him. After Curtis died, I couldn't separate myself from being his widow, from being Thaddeus's mother. Those roles defined me so completely that I forgot there was more to me. And now? He asked. How do you see yourself now? The question was simple but profound. I considered it carefully. I'm still Curtis's widow, still Thaddeus's mother, I said slowly. Those aspects of my identity aren't going away. But I'm also Margot Whitley, a woman with interests and opinions and a life that extends beyond those relationships. He nodded, approval warming his gaze. Well put. It took me much longer to reach that understanding. The conversation meandered pleasantly from there. We discovered shared interests in gardening, in classical music, in the lesser-known trails that wound through the mountains surrounding Everthorne. He had a dry wit that surfaced unexpectedly, making me laugh at moments I didn't anticipate. My daughter thinks I should try one of those dating applications, he confessed with a grimace. She created a profile for me, complete with a photograph where I appear to be unnaturally interested in a fishing lure. I chuckled at the image. My book club has been trying to set me up with Vivienne's brother-in-law for months. Apparently, his main qualification is that he's breathing and approximately my age. The bar is set so low for us, he agreed solemnly, his eyes twinkling. Simply existing is considered an achievement worthy of romantic interest. The afternoon stretched pleasantly, one pot of tea leading to another. Outside, the winter light began to fade, the street lamps flickering on along Main Street. Inside, surrounded by the gentle murmur of conversation and the fragrant steam rising from our cups, I felt a sense of ease I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the giddy excitement of youth, but something quieter and more valuable. The pleasure of connecting with someone who understood the contours of a life shaped by both joy and loss. When we finally prepared to leave, Casimir helped me. With my coat, his movements careful and courteous without being fussy. At the door, he hesitated, then asked, "Would you be interested in dinner next week? I know a place just outside town that makes exceptional paella." "I would like that very much," I replied without hesitation. His smile was worth the momentary vulnerability of enthusiasm. "Excellent. I'll call you with the details." We parted. On the sidewalk, the cold air refreshing after the coziness of the tea house. As I drove home through the darkening streets, I found myself humming along with the radio, a sense of anticipation warming me despite the winter chill. At home, a message waited on my answering machine. Thaddeus, his voice steady despite the obvious strain. "Just wanted to let you know I'm settled in the apartment. It's tiny and the view is basically the parking lot, but it feels clean, somehow." Brielle called 17 times after she found the divorce papers. I didn't answer. The attorney says that's the right approach for now. A pause, then. "Thanks again for this morning, for listening, for helping, for not saying. I told you so, even though you would have been entitled." I smiled at that last bit. Perhaps my son knew me better than I'd given him credit for. I did have a tendency toward "I told you so" moments, a trait Curtis had gently teased me about throughout our marriage. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Thaddeus called daily with updates on the divorce proceedings, which were moving quickly given the evidence of Brielle's infidelity and financial deception. She had hired an aggressive attorney who made outlandish demands, then quickly backpedaled when presented with the documentation of her client's activities. "They're offering a settlement," Thaddeus informed me during one call. "Basically, Brielle keeps her secret account. I keep what's left in our joint accounts, and we sell the house and split the proceeds evenly." "That doesn't seem equitable, given the down payment situation," I pointed out. "It's not," he agreed. "But my attorney thinks we could get tied up in court for years if we fight it. The money just doesn't seem worth the prolonged battle." His attitude surprised me. The Thaddeus of a few months ago would have fought viciously for every penny, would have demanded what he saw as justice regardless of the emotional and financial cost. This more pragmatic approach, this willingness to accept an imperfect resolution for the sake of moving forward, represented real growth. "If you're comfortable with the settlement, then I support your decision," I told him. "There's wisdom in knowing when to fight and when to walk away." "That sounds like something Dad would say," he observed. "It does, doesn't it?" I smiled at the connection. He always said that life was too short for unnecessary battles. Thaddeus was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about the kind of man he was, the kind of life he built. It wasn't flashy or Instagram-worthy, but it was solid, real." Another pause, then, "I want that kind of life, Mom. I want to build something that matters, not just something that looks good from the outside." The admission, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to my eyes. "Your father would be very proud to hear you say that," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "And so am I." As January gave way to February, A new rhythm established itself in my life. I continued my volunteer work at the botanical gardens, finding particular satisfaction in mentoring a group of high school students interested in environmental science. My book club meetings remained a highlight, though I noticed Vivian watching, me with knowing eyes whenever Casimir's name came up in conversation. "He's quite taken with you," she informed me over coffee after one meeting. "He actually asked my advice about which flowers you might prefer." Kaz, asking for romantic advice. I nearly fell off my chair. "We're enjoying each other's company," I said neutrally, though I couldn't entirely suppress a smile. "It's not a grand passion, Vivian. We're both too old and too sensible for that sort of drama." She snorted inelegantly. "Speak for yourself. I'm saving all my grand passions for my 70s. Going out with a bang. That's my plan." Casimir and I had settled into a comfortable routine of dinner once a week, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at his modest but impeccably maintained cabin on the outskirts of town. He was an excellent cook, I discovered, particularly with seafood and the Croatian dishes his mother had taught him. I reciprocated by inviting him to my home, serving meals in the formal dining room Curtis and I had used for special occasions. "This is quite a table," Casimir observed one evening, running his hand appreciatively over the polished mahogany surface. "Looks like it has stories to tell." "Decades of birthdays, anniversaries, holiday dinners," I confirmed. "Curtis found it at an estate sale just after we were married. It was in terrible condition, water damage, scratches, one leg practically falling off. He spent months restoring it, working every weekend until it was perfect." Casimir nodded, understanding in his eyes. The best things usually require that kind of patience, that investment of time and care. The observation hung between us, laden with meaning beyond furniture restoration. Neither of us was in a rush. We were both old enough to know that relationships, like fine wood, needed time to reveal their true character, to develop the patina that only comes with patience and genuine appreciation. One snowy afternoon in mid-February, I met Thaddeus at Riverstone Cafe, our now regular lunch spot. He looked better than he had in weeks. The shadows under his eyes had faded. His posture was more relaxed. His smile came more readily. "The divorce is final," he announced as we settled at our table. "Signed the last papers this morning." "How do you feel?" I asked, studying his face for signs of distress. He considered the question thoughtfully. "Lighter," he said finally. "Like I've set down a heavy load I've been carrying for years without realizing how much it weighed." "That sounds like relief, not regret," I observed. "It is," he confirmed. "I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, it does. But it's a clean pain, if that makes sense. Not the toxic, festering kind that comes from trying to maintain something fundamentally broken." I nodded, understanding completely. "So what's next for you? Will you stay in the apartment?" "For now," he said. "It's not glamorous, but it's affordable on my actual income. And speaking of income..." He hesitated, seeming nervous suddenly. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you. A business idea I've been developing." His excitement was palpable as he outlined his concept. A consulting firm focused on helping small businesses implement sustainable practices that would save money while reducing environmental impact. It was thoughtful, practical, and grounded in the kind of long-term thinking Curtis had always advocated. "The market research shows real potential," Thaddeus explained, pulling out a tablet to show me his projections. "Small to mid-sized businesses want to be more environmentally responsible, but they don't have the expertise in-house to make it happen efficiently. That's where my firm would come in." "It sounds promising," I agreed, genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of his research. "Have you thought about financing?" He nodded, setting down the tablet. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. I've saved enough for the initial setup, legal fees, basic website, business registration. But to really launch properly, I'd need about $50,000 for office space, professional marketing materials, and a small staff. I waited, curious to see where this was heading. The old Thaddeus would have simply asked for the money outright, perhaps with a vague promise of repayment that we both knew would never materialize. But this new version of my son surprised me once again. "I've explored small business loans," he continued. "The terms aren't ideal, but they're workable. However, I remembered what you said about the matching fund in your estate plan." He met my eyes directly. "If I can save $25,000 from my own earnings, would you consider matching it with $25,000 to launch the business? Not as a gift, but as an investment with proper documentation and a repayment schedule." The proposal was clear, professional, and respectful, acknowledging both his own responsibility and my potential concerns. It represented exactly the kind of approach I'd hoped to encourage with the matching fund provision. "I think that could be arranged," I said carefully. "But I'd want to see a formal business plan, cash flow projections, market analysis, all the documentation any investor would require." "Already working on it," he assured me. "I want to do this right, Mom. Not cutting corners, not taking shortcuts, building something real, like Dad would have done." The reference to Curtis, offered so naturally, warmed me. For years after his death, Thaddeus had avoided mentioning his father, as if the grief was too raw to acknowledge directly. This casual invocation of Curtis's approach, this desire to emulate his methodical integrity, felt like a healing of sorts. As we finished our lunch, Thaddeus asked about my own activities, showing genuine interest in my volunteer work and my social life. When I mentioned Casimir, he raised an eyebrow but didn't comment directly, simply asking if we were enjoying spending time together. "We are," I said, feeling oddly shy about discussing this new aspect of my life with my son. "He's thoughtful, interesting, skilled at many things. We're taking it slowly." Thaddeus nodded. "Good. You deserve someone who appreciates you, who sees you clearly." The simple affirmation, so different from the potential awkwardness I'd feared, touched me deeply. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a great deal coming from you." As we parted outside the cafe, Thaddeus surprised me with a warm hug. "I'm proud of us," he said, his voice muffled against my hair. "We're figuring it out, aren't we? This new way of being family." "We are," I agreed, returning the embrace. Day by day, conversation by conversation. I watched him walk to his car, his stride purposeful despite the slippery sidewalk. The change in him over these past weeks had been remarkable, from entitled and defensive to thoughtful and self-aware. The catalyst had been painful, certainly. No one would choose betrayal and divorce as a path to personal growth. But he was emerging from the experience stronger, more authentic, more truly himself. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Everthorne, I found myself thinking about transformation, how it rarely follows a neat linear path, how it often emerges from our most painful experiences, how it requires both letting go and taking hold. Thaddeus was transforming from the inside out, shedding the artificial persona he'd constructed with Brielle, rediscovering the values Curtis and I had tried to instill in him. I, too, was transforming, learning to be both mother and individual, supportive without being enmeshed, loving without enabling. At home, a package waited on my doorstep, a sleek black box tied with simple twine. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small ceramic vessel, its surface glazed in a deep blue that shifted from indigo to cerulean, depending on how the light struck it. A card tucked alongside read simply, "For your orchid transplants. K." I held the pot in my hands, admiring its perfect proportions, the subtle artistry of its glaze. It was beautiful without being showy, functional yet distinctive, rather like Casimir himself. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved me. He had noticed my passion for orchids, had remembered our conversation about the challenges of finding suitable containers for the delicate root systems. That evening, as I carefully transferred a Cattleya orchid with vibrant purple blooms into the new pot, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken since that December phone call. What had begun as a painful exclusion, a hurtful rejection, had catalyzed a series of changes that were, in the end, profoundly positive. Thaddeus was finding his authentic path. I was rediscovering aspects of myself that had nothing to do with motherhood or widowhood. New connections were forming, new possibilities emerging. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing the transplant, gently tamping the specialized soil mixture around the orchid's roots. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I found Brielle, standing on my doorstep, her face pale, her expression desperate. "Margot," she said, her voice unsteady. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I need your help. Please." For several heartbeats, I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Brielle as if she were an apparition. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, designer-clad woman who had dominated my son's life for 4 years. In her place stood someone almost unrecognizable, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, face bare of makeup, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes she'd slept in. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally manicured nails were bitten to the quick. "Please," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Every instinct warned me to close the door, to protect myself and Thaddeus from whatever manipulation she might attempt. But something in her expression, a raw desperation I'd never seen before, made me hesitate. 5 minutes, I agreed, stepping aside to let her enter. No more. She crossed the threshold tentatively, as if expecting to be turned away at any moment. In the warm light of my foyer, she looked even worse, gaunt, exhausted, trembling. Slightly. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, more from ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality. She shook her head. "I don't deserve your kindness, Margot. I know that." I led her to the living room, gesturing for her to sit while I remained standing. The power dynamic wasn't lost on either of us. She, supplicant. I, reluctantly holding court. "Your 5 minutes started when you walked through the door," I reminded her. "I suggest you use them wisely." She nodded, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "It's all gone," she said simply. "Everything. The money, the job, the friends, all of it." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "After Thaddeus filed for divorce, my boss—" She broke off, swallowing hard. "He ended our relationship. Said he couldn't risk the scandal, that the firm had a zero-tolerance policy for workplace relationships he'd conveniently forgotten about until his wife found our text messages." "I imagine that was difficult," I said neutrally. A bitter laugh escaped her. "That was just the beginning. He fired me the next day, cited performance issues in the termination letter. My so-called friends disappeared once the divorce became public knowledge. Turns out they were only interested in the lifestyle, the connections." "And the money?" I asked, though I could guess the answer. "My account has been frozen," she admitted. "Apparently diverting funds from a joint marital account constitutes fraud. The bank is cooperating with the investigation." She looked down at her hands. "I used some of it to help my parents. They've had financial difficulties. The rest went to maintaining appearances, clothes, travel, the right restaurants, the right people. And now those right people are nowhere to be found," I observed. She nodded, misery etched into every line of her face. "I have nowhere to go, Margot. The house is being sold. My credit cards are maxed out. The hotels won't take me anymore." She hesitated, then added in a small voice, "I slept in my car last night." The confession hung in the air between us. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation, the calculated vulnerability she'd displayed so often during her marriage to Thaddeus. But all I saw was genuine desperation, the stark terror of someone watching their life collapse around them. "Why come to me?" I asked finally. "After everything that's happened, why would you expect me to help you?" She met my eyes directly for the first time. "Because you're the only truly decent person I've ever known, even when I was manipulating. You lying to you, excluding you from our lives. You never stopped caring about Thaddeus. About both of us, really." Her voice wavered. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I have nowhere else to turn." The naked honesty of her admission caught me off guard. In 4 years, this was the first time Brielle had spoken to me without calculation, without an agenda beyond simple human need. "What exactly are you asking for?" I inquired, keeping my voice level. "Just a temporary place to stay," she said quickly. "A few days on your couch while I figure out my next steps. I can clean, cook, help around the house, anything you need." I considered her request, weighing compassion against caution. Helping Brielle could complicate the fragile new relationship I was building with Thaddeus. It might appear as a betrayal, taking sides with the woman who had hurt him so deeply. "Have you spoken with Thaddeus about this?" I asked. She shook her head miserably. "He won't take my calls. His attorney handles all communication." "And your parents?" "They're in Arizona," she said, "in a retirement community that doesn't allow long-term guests. And after everything, they're not exactly eager to help." I walked to the window, looking out at the winter landscape while I gathered my thoughts. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow-covered garden. In the fading light, the world looked stark, unforgiving, much like Brielle's current circumstances. What would Curtis do in this situation? The question came unbidden, as it often did when I faced difficult decisions. My husband had possessed an innate generosity of spirit, a willingness to offer second chances that sometimes bordered on naivety. But he'd also been an excellent judge of sincerity, able to distinguish genuine remorse from tactical contrition. 3 days, I said finally, turning back to face her. "You can stay for 3 days while you make arrangements for something more permanent. The guest room on the 3rd floor is available." Relief flooded her face, quickly followed by caution. "Thank you, but there are conditions, aren't there?" "Several," I confirmed. "First, you will not contact Thaddeus or attempt to see him. If he discovers you're staying here and reaches out to you, you will refer him to me. Second, I expect complete honesty. No more manipulation, no more half-truths. Third, you will contribute to the household as you offered. Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing." She nodded eagerly, accepting each condition without protest. "And finally," I added, "you will use these 3 days to develop a concrete plan for moving forward. I'm offering temporary shelter, not a permanent solution to your problems." "I understand," she said quietly. "And I'm grateful, Margot. More than I can express." I showed her to the guest room on the 3rd floor, a space I rarely used, with sloped ceilings and dormer windows that overlooked the back garden. It was modestly furnished but comfortable, with a double bed, a small desk, and a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub. "There are clean towels in the bathroom," I told her. "The kitchen is open if you're hungry. I usually have breakfast around 7. "Thank you," she said again, standing awkwardly in the center of the room with her single small suitcase. In that moment, she looked very young and very lost, far from the polished, confident woman who had swept my son off his feet 4 years ago. I left her to settle in, returning to the main floor with a mixture of doubt and resolve swirling in my mind. Had I made a terrible mistake? Would Thaddeus see this as a betrayal, an undermining of his pain? or was offering basic human kindness to someone in desperate straits simply the right thing to do, regardless of past hurts? The phone rang as I reached the bottom of the stairs, Thaddeus's name appearing on the caller ID. For a moment, I considered not answering. I needed time to process my decision, to formulate how I would explain Brielle's presence in my home. But avoiding difficult conversations had never served me well in the past. "Hello, Thaddeus," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom, I just got the strangest call from Mrs. Hendrickson next door," he said without preamble. "She said she saw Brielle going into your house. Please tell me she's confused." I sighed, moving to sit in Curtis's old reading chair. "She's not confused, Thaddeus. Brielle came here about half an hour ago." "What?" His voice rose in disbelief. "Mom, why would you even open the door to her after everything she's done?" "Because she had nowhere else to go," I said simply. "She's staying in the third-floor guest room for 3 days while she makes arrangements for something more permanent." Silence stretched across the line, taut with tension. When Thaddeus finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "You're harboring the woman who cheated on me, stole from me, and tried to manipulate you? Have you lost your mind?" "I'm offering temporary shelter to another human being who is in crisis," I corrected him gently. "It's not an endorsement of her actions or a betrayal of your pain. It's simply an act of basic decency." "Decency," he repeated bitterly. "Was she decent when she lied about Christmas? When she siphoned money from our accounts? When she slept with her boss while I was researching marriage counselors?" "No," I acknowledged. "She wasn't. And nothing I'm doing now erases or excuses those actions." "Then why?" he demanded. "Why invite her chaos back into your life, into our lives?" I considered his question carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than a reflexive one. "Because I believe in second chances," I said finally. "Not unlimited chances, not unearned forgiveness, but the opportunity to do better when you've hit rock bottom. Your father believed in that too. Remember when Miller Chandler embezzled from the company? Everyone wanted your father to press charges, to make an example of him. Instead, he worked out a repayment plan and kept him employed under strict supervision." "That was different," Thaddeus protested. "Miller had a gambling addiction. He was sick, not malicious." "Perhaps," I conceded. "But your father's point was that people are more than their worst actions, that sometimes hitting bottom is the beginning of transformation, not the end of the story." Another lengthy silence followed. I could almost see Thaddeus pacing his apartment, wrestling with conflicting emotions. "3 days?" he said eventually. "You promised her 3 days?" "Yes." "And then what? She's out of your life for good?" I hesitated, unwilling to make promises I wasn't certain I could keep. "Then she moves forward with whatever plan she develops during these 3 days. My commitment is temporary shelter, nothing more." He sighed heavily. "I don't like this, Mom. I don't like her being anywhere near you or your home." "I understand," I said softly. "And I'm sorry if this feels like a betrayal. It isn't meant to be." "I know," he admitted grudgingly. "You've always had a soft heart. Dad used to say you'd adopt every stray in the county if he let you." The memory brought a small smile to my lips. Curtis had indeed teased me about my tendency to take in waifs and strays, birds with broken wings, abandoned cats, neighborhood children who needed a safe place to land temporarily. "Just be careful, okay?" Thaddeus continued. "Brielle is really good at making you feel sorry for her while she's calculating her next move. I'll be careful," I promised. "And Thaddeus? Thank you for telling me how you feel instead of shutting me out. That means more than you know." The next morning, I woke to the unfamiliar scent of coffee already brewing and the sound of movement in the kitchen below. For a moment, I was disoriented. I lived alone, had for 5 years since Curtis's death. Then the events of the previous evening came rushing back. Brielle. Of course. I dressed quickly and made my way downstairs, unsure what to expect. The scene that greeted me in the kitchen was surreal in its domesticity. Brielle, hair damp from a shower and wearing what appeared to be an old sweatshirt of mine she must have found in the guest room closet, stood at the stove flipping pancakes. The kitchen table was already set for 2, with fresh fruit, syrup, and steaming mugs of coffee arranged neatly. "Good morning," she said, glancing up as I entered. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you for last night, and cooking is, well, it's one of the few useful skills I actually possess." I moved to pour myself coffee, observing her with curiosity. "I didn't realize you could cook." A flush crept up her neck. "There's a lot about me you don't know," she said quietly. "Some of it by my design, some of it simply because I've spent so long playing a role I barely recognize myself anymore." The admission was surprisingly candid. I settled at the table, watching as she transferred a stack of golden pancakes to a serving plate. "For what it's worth," she continued, bringing the pancakes to the table, "I never actually disliked you, Margot. I was intimidated by you, by your confidence, your independence, the way Thaddeus respected your opinion even when he disagreed. With you. I wanted him to see me that way, but I didn't know how to earn it, so I tried to minimize your influence instead." "By excluding me," I said, not accusatory but clarifying. She nodded, sitting down across from me. "By excluding you, by creating artificial distance, by making everything a competition I couldn't possibly win. It was childish and insecure and ultimately self-defeating." She pushed the pancakes toward me. "Please, eat while they're hot." I served myself, then watched as she did the same. The pancakes were surprisingly good. Light, fluffy, with hints of vanilla and cinnamon. "These are excellent," I acknowledged. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," she replied. "Before she died, I spent summers with her in rural Mississippi. No cable TV, no internet, just acres of farmland, and a kitchen where something was always simmering or baking." A wistful smile crossed her face. "She was the one stable presence in my childhood. My parents were. Well, dysfunctional doesn't begin to cover it." "You never mentioned her before," I observed. "No, I didn't," she agreed. "It didn't fit the image I was projecting. Sophisticated urban professional from a good family. The truth. Poor, rural. Kid with alcoholic parents and a grandmother who taught her to cook on a wood-burning stove wasn't exactly the background I wanted to advertise in Thaddeus's social circles." I considered her across the table, this woman I'd thought I knew, or at least whose type I'd thought I recognized. The calculated social climber, the manipulative gold digger. But perhaps, like most people, she was more complex than the role she'd chosen to play. "What are your plans?" I asked directly. "You have 3 days here. Then what?" She set down her fork, her expression turning serious. "I've been thinking about that all night. I have a cousin in Nashville. Not close, but we've kept in touch over the years. She works for a catering company. I called her this morning and she thinks she can get me an entry-level position. It wouldn't be much, but it would be a start." "Nashville is a significant change from Everthorne," I noted. "That's rather the point," she said with a trace of her old sharpness. "I need to start over completely. New city, new identity, or rather my actual identity, not the facade I've been maintaining." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And Thaddeus deserves to move on without running into me at the grocery store or the coffee shop. He's been hurt enough." The consideration for Thaddeus's feelings seemed genuine, another surprise in a morning already filled with them. "If Nashville is your plan, what do you need to make it happen?" I asked practically. "Transportation," she admitted. "My car was leased through my former employer, part of my compensation package. It's been repossessed. I have enough in my personal checking account for a bus ticket, but nothing for housing deposits or other expenses once I arrive. I thought for a moment, weighing options and potential pitfalls. I might be able to help with transportation, I said cautiously. Not as a gift, but as a loan with clear repayment terms. Hope flickered across her face. You'd do that? After everything? I'm considering it, I clarified. Depending on the details of your plan and your commitment to honoring the agreement. She nodded eagerly. Of course. Whatever terms you said, I'll accept them. I know my word doesn't carry much weight with you right now, but I promise, Margot, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I just want a fresh start. Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock at the front door. Not the doorbell, but 3 sharp raps that carried a sense of urgency. I excused myself and went to answer, finding Casimir on the porch, looking uncharacteristically concerned. Kaz, I said, surprised. Is everything all right? I'm not sure, he replied, his brow furrowed. I was driving by and noticed an unfamiliar car in your driveway. Given everything you told me about your former daughter-in-law, I thought I should check on you. The protective gesture touched me deeply. That's very thoughtful, but I'm fine. Brielle is staying with me temporarily, just for a few days while she makes arrangements to leave town. His expression cleared somewhat, though concern still lingered in his eyes. I see. Is there anything I can do to help? The offer was sincere, free of judgment or presumption, not questioning my decision to help Brielle, simply asking how he might support me in that choice. Another piece of evidence that this man was someone truly worth knowing. Actually, I said, an idea forming, there might be. Do you have a moment to come in? I introduced Casimir to Brielle, whose surprise at meeting a man in my life was poorly concealed. We sat at the kitchen table, finishing the now cold pancakes while I explained Brielle's Nashville plan and the transportation challenge. I have a proposition, Casimir said after listening carefully. My niece Petra just moved back to Everthorne and needs a car. I've been helping her look for something reliable but affordable. If you're planning to sell your vehicle to fund a new one for Brielle, perhaps we could streamline the process. Petra buys your car at fair market value, and we find something suitable for the Nashville trip. The suggestion was practical and elegant, resolving multiple problems simultaneously. By the end of the day, with Casimir's help, we had arranged the sale of my rarely used second car to his niece, purchased a modest but reliable used vehicle for Brielle, and drawn up a formal loan agreement with clear terms for repayment. Throughout the process, I observed Brielle closely, watching how she interacted with Casimir, how she approached the financial discussions, how she responded to the formality of the loan agreement. At every turn, she surprised me with her maturity and transparency, asking thoughtful questions, accepting responsibility for the terms, expressing genuine gratitude without the excessive flattery that had once characterized her interactions with me. Late that afternoon, as Casimir prepared to leave, he pulled me aside on the porch. Your former daughter-in-law isn't what I expected, he admitted quietly. No, I agreed. She's not what I expected either. People are rarely just one thing, are they? Rarely all good or all bad. He smiled, the familiar crinkles appearing around his eyes. My grandmother used to say that people are like houses. You can't judge them properly until you've seen them in both storm and sunshine. Your grandmother sounds very wise, I replied, returning his smile. She was, he agreed. I think she would have liked you very much. He leaned in and, with a gentle hesitancy that made the gesture all the more meaningful, kissed my cheek. Dinner tomorrow? After your houseguest leaves? I'd like that, I said softly. The next morning dawned with a clarity that seemed fitting for new beginnings. Brielle was already awake, her few belongings packed neatly in her small suitcase. We shared a quiet breakfast, the conversation practical rather than emotional, last-minute route planning, weather forecasts for the drive, contact information exchanges. I've prepared some food for the journey, I told her, handing over a small cooler. Sandwiches, fruit, cookies. The thermos has coffee. She accepted the cooler with a look that bordered on awe. You think of everything, she said quietly. Force of habit, I replied with a small smile. I've been taking care of people for a long time. As she loaded her things into the used car that would carry her to Nashville, I felt an unexpected emotion. Not relief at her departure, as I might have anticipated, but something closer to hope. Hope that the authentic person I'd glimpsed beneath the facade might find her way in this new chapter. We stood beside the car, winter sunshine glinting off the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The moment felt significant but awkward. What was the appropriate farewell for this strange, complicated interlude in our lives? I don't know if we'll see each other again, Brielle said, breaking the silence. But I want you to know that I'll honor our agreement. Every payment, on time, until the car is fully paid for. I believe you will, I told her, and realized with some surprise that I meant it. She hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced me briefly. Thank you, Margot, for everything, but especially for seeing me, the real me, when I was at my worst. As she drove away, I remained on the porch, watching until her car disappeared from view. The future she faced would be challenging. Genuine work, modest living, the struggle to rebuild an identity based on truth rather than illusion. Yet somehow, I felt optimistic about her chances. The woman I'd glimpsed in these past few days possessed strengths I hadn't recognized before: resilience, adaptability, a capacity for honest self-reflection that had been hidden beneath layers of artifice. The sound of another car approaching drew my attention. Thaddeus's sedan turned into the driveway, moving slowly over the snow-covered surface. He parked and approached cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "She's gone?" he asked as he reached the porch. "Just left," I confirmed. "She's driving to Nashville to start over." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. That's good." We went inside, seeking the warmth of the kitchen. I made fresh coffee while Thaddeus sat at the table, seemingly lost in thought. "You okay?" I asked, setting a mug before him. He considered the question carefully. "Getting there," he said finally. "I talked to her yesterday, you know. Really talked to her, maybe for the first time since we met." "And?" I prompted gently. "And I realized something important," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "I never really knew her, the real her. I fell in love with a projection, a carefully constructed image. And she never really knew me either, because I was too busy trying to be the person I thought she wanted." The insight surprised me with its depth. "That's a painful realization." "Yeah," he agreed, "but necessary. We were building on sand, not bedrock. It was bound to collapse eventually." He took a sip of coffee, then continued. "I also realized something about us, you and me." "What's that?" I asked. "We were doing the same thing in a way. I was playing a role, the successful son who needed nothing, even while I was taking everything. You were playing the all-providing mother, never setting boundaries, never demanding respect. Neither of us was being fully honest or authentic." His perception startled me, not because it was wrong, but because it was so acutely right. "When did you get so insightful?" I asked, only half joking. A small smile crossed his face. "Apparently, losing everything focuses the mind wonderfully." Who knew? We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the winter sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, casting peaceful patterns on the worn wooden table where our family had shared countless meals. "I'm sorry about Christmas," Thaddeus said, suddenly. "It was cruel and calculated, and I went along with it even though I knew it would hurt you." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand briefly. "It did hurt. But perhaps it was necessary. The catalyst for all these changes. He nodded thoughtfully. Maybe so, though I wish we could have found a less painful path to the same destination. Don't we all? I agreed with a rueful smile. But here we are nonetheless. Here we are, he echoed, raising his coffee mug, in a small toast. To new beginnings. I raised my own mug, clinking it gently against his. To new beginnings. We spent the remainder of the morning discussing his business plans, the practical steps needed to launch his environmental consulting firm. His excitement was contagious, his vision clear and purposeful. This wasn't the hasty enthusiasm of a new scheme, but the measured determination of a well-considered venture. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Mom, there's something." "Else? Ellery mentioned you're seeing someone. A plumber she ran into at Vivienne's dinner party?" I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, absurdly like a teenager caught passing notes in class. "His name is Casimir, Kaz, and yes, we've been spending some time together. It's very new, very tentative." To my surprise, Thaddeus smiled broadly. "Good for you. Dad would approve, I think. He always said you were too vibrant to ever be truly alone." The casual mention of Curtis, offered so naturally, warmed me from within. For years after his death, Thaddeus had avoided speaking of his father directly, as if the grief were too raw to acknowledge. This easy invocation of Curtis's perspective felt like healing, like the closing of a wound long left open. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a great deal to me." After Thaddeus left, I moved through the quiet house with a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The events of the past few months had been turbulent, painful, challenging in ways I never anticipated. Yet they had brought unexpected gifts, a healthier relationship with my son, a chance to help someone genuinely change course, the beginning of something promising with Casimir. Life continued to surprise me, presenting challenges I hadn't sought and opportunities I hadn't imagined. 6 months ago, I'd been a solitary widow, my relationship with my son strained by his marriage, my future stretching before me in a predictable pattern of gentle decline. Now I found myself navigating a landscape transformed, my relationship with Thaddeus renewed on healthier terms, an unexpected connection with Casimir blooming slowly but steadily, and the strange interlude with Brielle adding a layer of complexity. To my understanding of human nature, Curtis had always said that life's greatest adventures began when we thought the story was already written. Standing in my kitchen in the winter sunlight, I finally understood what he meant. My story wasn't ending. It was evolving, adding new chapters I couldn't have imagined. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to turn the page. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.